It's Friday night, which means it's time for Friday Night Feuds number 4, and this time it's Billy Corgan versus Soundgarden. There's obviously been a lot of talk lately about Soundgarden, given that they are being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and rightfully so. So I thought today was a great time to talk about this ridiculous feud. We know that Billy Corgan can be kind of a loose cannon with the things that he says, although maybe he's calmed down a little bit in recent years. But he, of course, has feuded with all sorts of different people and bands: Smash Mouth, Collective Soul, Anderson Cooper, his own bandmates, Sharon Osbourne, although I believe that one is settled because pretty sure Billy is doing the Back to the Beginning event with Black Sabbath and Ozzy later this year. He has not always been known to be the nicest guy in the world, although maybe there is some merit to some of the feuds that he's had over the years, although, for being honest, even that's probably up for debate. But in 2012, Billy called out Soundgarden, who had reunited 2 years earlier in 2010 after a 12-year absence, and he said that they were reuniting only for the money. It was basically a cash grab. According to Philstar.com at the time, Billy Corgan had this to say during a press conference before a show that he was doing in the Philippines. There are those bands that are essentially coming back only to make money, playing their old albums, and maybe somewhere in the back of their minds, they're thinking there might be a future. I am not in that business, obviously. I condemn anybody who's in that business but doesn't admit they're in that business. When Soundgarden came back and they just played their old songs, great. I was a fan of Soundgarden, but call it for what it is. They're just out there to have one more round at the till. Same with Pavement and these other bands. Without the young fans, there is no future for Smashing Pumpkins. We can't run an oldies business. Not only is it boring, it's actually not a very good business. Now, it is important to keep in mind that both Smashing Pumpkins and Soundgarden went on extended hiatuses before eventually returning, and obviously the two bands had long-standing relationships with each other, given the scene that they come from and the time frame that they came up in. And just weeks after calling out Soundgarden in 2012, shortly after that, Billy Corgan did another interview, this time with the radio station Area 93.3, where he said it was actually Chris Cornell that started the feud all the way back in 2007 when Smashing Pumpkins returned, and Cornell apparently called them out. Here's what Billy Corgan said when he was asked about his then recent Soundgarden remarks. Well, there's a little bit of a backstory there. Chris Cornell was somebody I considered a friend and would never have said a harsh word about. When the band came back in 2007, he was quoted in an interview saying basically he didn't consider our reunion to be, in quotations, to be quote-unquote legitimate. I kind of have an elephant's memory when it comes to somebody punching me in the face. Cornell's one of those people who is extremely talented. I was a fan from literally their second EP, met him in 1991, and still believe in what was great about the band. But when we're sitting there having conversations about who is doing what, I am no longer going to shield somebody. If they want to punch me in the face, I'm happy to punch them back in the face. Respect the man's talent. People gloss over the Timbaland album. You know what I mean? My point is, look, I don't have any specific bone to pick, even though I just made a specific case for one. My point is, don't lump us in with people who are sort of just doing the reunion lap. Now, of course, fans are lighting up my Twitter saying, do you realize Soundgarden is doing a new album? Well, if they are, great. That's what they should be doing. Great musicians, they should make new music, and hopefully they'll make great albums, because we need artists to make great albums and great music in this day and age of the robots and the posers and the faux hawk bands. Does it make sense? Do I sound like a fan? Because I am a fan. I want all of my generation to raise the bar, and I don't appreciate when somebody from my generation, who I once considered a friend, decides to piss on my little spot in the corner for whatever reason at the same time he's making the Timbaland album. You know what I mean? That's where it gets kind of dicey for me, so that's sort of the real backstory of where that came from. If you don't remember, the Timbaland album that Billy keeps referring to is Chris Cornell's 2009 solo album Scream that was produced by Timbaland. It was very pop-leaning. It was pretty different than Soundgarden or Audioslave. So it sounds like Billy Corgan there was almost accusing Chris Cornell of selling out or something. And that was in August of 2012. But in November of that year, Chris Cornell actually addressed this feud during an interview that he did with ABC News Radio, essentially saying that rather than dissing him and Soundgarden, Billy Corgan should be thanking him because here's what he said. When Billy Corgan was completely broke, I got him a movie deal with director Cameron Crowe where he made $40,000. He was very happy about that, and he was specifically happy about the $40,000. So next time you see him, tell him he owes me my $40,000 back. Although he doesn't name it, I believe the movie that Chris is referring to is Cameron Crowe's 1992 movie Singles, because besides from the members of Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains being in the movie, I think the Pearl Jam guys were in a band in that movie called Citizen Dick. I've not seen the movie, but that's what I've been able to gather online. But Cornell himself was also in the movie. The movie takes place in Seattle in the early 90s as grunge is beginning to explode. So it really all makes sense. And while Billy Corgan was not in the movie, the soundtrack does feature the song Drown. So I have to imagine that that is what Chris Cornell is referring to. I can't really imagine it being anything else. But for a while, it seemed like Chris Cornell would be the one to have the last word of this fuse. And that was the case for quite some time, actually. And Soundgarden would go on to release what would be their final album, at least as of now, until the last album they recorded with Chris Cornell gets released, if it ever does. Although Kim Thayil from Soundgarden just recently said that he does think it will come out at some point. But anyways, I digress. Soundgarden released King Animal in November of 2012, which I assume is why Chris Cornell did that ABC News Radio interview to begin with. And things remained silent until August of 2014, when Soundgarden guitarist Kim Thayil did an interview with DC9 at Night prior to a show in Dallas that Soundgarden is going to be doing around that time. And he seemingly brought up the feud and took a jab at Billy Corgan, although he did not name names, when he was asked if he was worried when the band was recording King Animal that Soundgarden fans may have moved on. Here's what he said. We recorded King Animal in 2011 and we felt confident in our fan base. We knew that from the support we got for our previous releases. We released Telephantasm, which was a retrospective album, a greatest hits package. We were aware that the strong fan base remained. We feel confident that if the four of us all like an album, it's going to do well. We don't have one member who is deciding the composition of an album. You should know who I am talking about, but I am not going to name names. We have four guys who write songs here. We have four guys contributing material without someone calling bullshit on it. You follow me? There are many bands out there that are led by one guy who does all the writing. He might have some religious epiphany or some psychedelic experience, and he will write all this material that can very easily suck. And the rest of his band feels like they have to play it. That is not Soundgarden. Consequently, we have never made a record that sucked. Now, according to Far Out Magazine, in a 2024 article, there's another quote from Kim Thayil that's a bit more brutal and is seemingly about Billy Corgan, but unfortunately, I could not find the actual source of the comment in question, but take it with a grain of salt. But here's what Kim allegedly also said in an interview. Here's how it's possible to do a bad record. You've got one moron who runs the whole thing and a bunch of guys they hire around him. Now you can make a bad record because your stupid ideas aren't being bounced around, going to the fucking ether, he'd say. And those comments from Kim Thayil essentially marked the end of the feud between Billy Corgan and Soundgarden. And as you know, Chris Cornell tragically died by suicide in 2017 after a show in Detroit. Although we did hear from Billy Corgan one more time later on in 2017 when he did an interview with SF Weekly, and they pointed out that a lot of Billy's contemporaries had sadly passed, including Chris Cornell as well as Chester Bennington, of course from Linkin Park, who had also died that year. Here's what Billy Corgan said to SF Weekly. I wish I had more answers and I had done more. I knew Chris and we had a bit of a falling out and were never able to patch that up. I wish I hadn't contributed in even the most minuscule way to his unhappiness. I wish I'd have been a force for encouragement because he influenced me and I looked up to him. Chester was obviously one of the best rock singers ever, and it was such a great honor when he covered Bullet with Butterfly Wings. It's haunting to think all this talent is gone. That's a lot of memory, a lot of music, a lot of we should be sitting on the lawn when we're 60 singing Black Hole Sun together with the guy who wrote it. Those are shared tragedies. So of course, unfortunately, a very, very sad ending to all of this. But with the sound of the bell, that is going to do it for this week's edition of Friday Night Feuds. Thank you so much for hanging out. Feel free to drop a like, subscribe below if you feel like it. And while you're down there, let me know what other feuds you would like to see moving forward. I love doing these, and I would love to hear from you and what feuds you would like to see. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.